Hi everyone, it is Ben Angel here and welcome to the presentation Mental Health and the Ketogenic Diet, a Paradigm Shift in the Making. I know we couldn't be there together at KetoCon, but I'm excited to share this presentation with you regardless from the comfort of your own home. Now, what we're going to explore in this particular presentation is going to open a few eyes because throughout the research that I've been doing and the survey of 50,000 people that we conducted that I'll discuss, some of the conclusions I kind of made throughout this journey surprised me personally, and they may in fact surprise you. So here's what we're going to explore. The keto diet and whether or not it's an effective treatment for depression, how we can use it to address mental fatigue, brain fog, and help to stabilize energy levels. The role of inflammation and depression, why that may be one of the reasons keto can help some people with depression specifically. And most importantly, and this is a key factor of this presentation, which is how to identify if you or a patient is a right fit for the keto diet, depending on your existing symptoms. Now, in this presentation, there are certain things that are sensitive of nature. We will be discussing, obviously, depression and suicide. If you feel like you need help right now with the craziness that's going on in the world, make sure you look up the suicide hotline if you feel you need to. And I would encourage you to do so if you need support. The other things that you may want to consider is speaking to a psychologist or a counselor and getting yourself to a functional doctor when you can, who will take a holistic approach looking at your symptoms to help you dig out the root cause of your rut. So who am I and what do I know about mental health? Well, I'm the author of the international bestseller Unstoppable. Now, I actually wrote Unstoppable due to my own experiences. In March of 2017, I suddenly became suicidal and I completely hit breaking point after a 3-year struggle, experiencing severe fatigue to the point I was sleeping 3 to 4 times a day just to get through the day. I was experiencing depressive episodes, mood swings. I was angry. I'm not typically an angry person. And despite eating a meal plan from a nutritionist, taking supplementation, going to countless doctors, nothing worked. I would only ever get a quick boost of motivation listening to self-help programs, to later find out it would last a couple of days and I would default back to my biochemical set point, which is a key topic of the book and what we'll discuss here. Now, through that process, I decided I was desperate for help. I pitched a book idea to Entrepreneur Magazine here in the US, which I'm an article and video contributor of, saying that I wanted to go on this 90-day journey and see if I could actually get to the root of my ruts, with the caveat that I didn't know if I would actually get better or not. Now, obviously, short story, is that I did get healthier in the end. The publisher took a huge risk on this project. Now, throughout that journey, I interviewed doctors, neuroscientists, biohackers such as Dave Asprey, and I did it with a lot of support of key people at the time because I was still struggling with mental health issues. I also tried wearable tech that's used by the military and supplements that are also used by the military and elite athletes. And I even traveled to San Francisco to interview one of the co-founders, Jeffrey Wu of Human, otherwise known as HBMN, about their ketone ester product. And at the time, I did in fact ask the question, could a ketone ester be useful for treating depression, which I'll talk about later. I also, through this journey, underwent various lab tests. This is one of the hardest projects I have ever worked on in my entire life. Now, as I don't have a medical or health background whatsoever, the publisher and I decided to take some extraordinary steps to ensure accuracy because of the sensitive nature of this subject. We had 3 editors. Most books only get 1. So we had an independent medical and scientific editor and an independent fact checker. We then sent the book for review to 30 plus doctors, nutritionists, psychologists, clinical social workers, as well as a former graduate in public health from Harvard. We've since surveyed 50,000 people, asking them 30 questions, looking at their biological as well as their psychological health, and I'll be reporting on some of those results in this presentation. And we cited over 169 clinical studies that in fact back up what we've found in our own survey of 50,000. As you can imagine, this wasn't a small project by any means. And one of the things that I looked at in the book was, in fact, the ketogenic diet and whether or not there's a therapeutic use in the treatment of depression. Now, as most of you already know a lot about keto, here's just a little bit of background on it. We know that it's been around for around 100 years to help in the treatment of seizures in epileptic patients. It's an invaluable tool for the treatment of neurological conditions or brain-based disorders, chronic headaches, brain injury, ALS, Parkinson's disease. It's obviously high in healthy fats, low in carbs, 20 grams or less per day. And it does require a limited protein intake as the excess raises blood sugar and insulin levels. So what is the problem that we're faced with as a society as a whole? First of all, depression is on the increase. The World Health Organization reports that over 250 million people worldwide are affected. And I suspect we're on the verge of a mental health crisis in the coming months due to what's occurring in our environment at the moment. It is up to us to help educate others on how to get through the existing situation and provide as much empathy, compassion, and care that we can, and educate them on the different treatments that are available to assist them. The other problem that comes with depression is that it's multifaceted. There are countless different causes, which makes misdiagnosis very easy to achieve, unfortunately. And in my own case, going to 5 different doctors, in the end, not one of those particular doctors could actually work out the root cause. It was through doing the research and various other conversations and the lab test results that I did by myself and the assistance with others that I was able to work out some of the issues. The other challenge that we face, in particularly in considering keto as a therapeutic treatment of depression, is it actually treating the cause or is it treating the symptoms? As we know, if we go to a typical GP, we may be given antidepressants, which could help boost serotonin. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the cause is effectively being addressed. And it also means that some people may feel great for a little while, but then they slip back and once again default to their biochemical set point, which at that point in time isn't setting them up for success. There's also a massive bias of treatment when it comes to depression. Depending on whether you go to a psychologist, a doctor, a self-help guru, you'll get different directions on how to deal with it. And because it is multifaceted, some of those strategies will work with one type of depression, but it won't work with another. Hence, someone may become even more depressed or despaired that nothing works for them. So we need to effectively keep that in mind. The challenge, coming from a personal development background myself, the challenge that we face with personal development is that the common theme is that depression is the result of a lack of willpower. They just don't have the strength to push through and get over it. And we often get told to shut up, get over it, and just get things done, start thinking positively. And as you'll see from some of the statistics I share with you, you'll understand why that advice is bad at best and in fact dangerous at worst. And we need to have a deeper understanding of the different types of depression that are actually out there, the research that is available to us, and tailor an approach to each individual. So the other factors that we need to consider before we recommend any kind of dietary protocol is that there are also little discussed causes that I researched in my own journey in the book that can trigger depression and mimic psychological disorders such as anxiety. And that includes inflammation, which triggers cytokines and has been shown through studies to alter our behavior. Inflammation is one of those key aspects that's been heavily researched in the link for depression. And there are a multitude of different studies that are occurring over the last couple of years where doctors are combining antidepressants with anti-inflammatory medication with great success. So an inflammatory marker is something we need to consider, and it could be triggered through a food sensitivity. And other factors we need to also look at are nutritional deficiencies, hormonal imbalances, side effects from medications, and whether or not keto can assist with some of these issues or in fact make them worse, which is a question that isn't being asked a lot in all of the research papers that I've looked over. So here's kind of the bottom line. There is some research out there. It's promising, but it's in its infancy at the moment. So let's take a look at some of it. The first one, in one study, rats on a keto diet moved around more compared to the control group, which was low physical activity, which is considered a marker of depression. So the researchers concluded rats on a keto diet were less likely to show behavioral despair. In another study, 8-week-old mice were exposed to the keto diet in the womb, but who ate a standard diet once born were less likely to be depressed or anxious. And other studies indicate that keto influences brain structure and increase the thickness of blood vessels in the brain. Now, this gives us some hope. There are a few challenges with these studies. There was a review of 17 different studies conducted in 2017, and yes, there is more research since then. But one of the common factors that we've found in the research being done is that there isn't enough research being done, first of all, and we also don't understand the types of depression that are effectively being tested or treated. We also don't understand the baseline health of the individual. And in the example of rats and mice, it's very easy to give an animal a strict dietary protocol. But how does that play when you're trying to introduce a dietary protocol to someone who is experiencing severe brain fog, potentially having mood swings or even suicidal thoughts, who can barely manage to get through the day, let alone change their entire diet? So there is a massive hurdle we need to get over to ensure that keto can in fact help. And there is hope in this. Another study also found that ketones protects brain cells from injury. So let's look at some of the mechanisms that keto could affect to help with behavioral change. Well, the first one, as I discussed, anti-inflammatory, protects the brain cells. Next one is critically important, which is to eliminate large spikes in blood sugar and help to eliminate energy crashes. As we know from research, when we get hangry, and I'm sure you all experience it at some point, I know I do, not so much anymore, but I used to, is that what actually occurs in the brain is that when we get that food craving, our blood suddenly shifts from our prefrontal cortex to our primal mind fight or flight center. Now, the prefrontal cortex is in control of emotional control, logical and rational thinking. So that's where we get that craving and suddenly we're throwing open the cupboard, eating sugar and carbohydrates and other highly processed foods that will once again later result in another crash. Now, for individuals experiencing depression, their energy levels tend to fluctuate up and down depending on the severity. Some may be extremely low, which makes it hard for them to do the psychological processing that a dietary change actually requires. So we have to be very careful on how we change their diets at the time. The other thing is, and this is where it gives hope, is that ketones provide an immediate source of energy for your brain because they're metabolized faster than glucose. The challenge is getting these individuals across that hurdle. There's an increased rate of neurogenesis, how often we make new brain cells, and the body, in fact, produces more GABA when on a keto diet, which can produce a calming effect, which could help with some of these symptoms. But there are certain factors that we really need to consider before prescribing keto, or in fact, any diet to any individual, which is based on a survey of 50,000 people worldwide. And the first key question, and if you're a nutritionist or someone who is helping people with their keto diet, I highly encourage you to write these questions down. The first is, have they had a comprehensive mental diagnosis? As we know, there are different types of depression. They could have experienced some kind of psychological trauma in their past, or it could be biological depression. Could it be a mood disorder? So we want to factor in these questions and look at the existing research to see if they're actually considering them. As I've found from the studies that I've looked at, these aren't the questions that are currently being asked. We need to know specifically the type of depression that it could treat and whether or not that person can actually do it. Secondly, are they high risk and require additional psychiatric care? As you'll see some of the results from the survey in a minute, there are large percentages of individuals who are having suicidal thoughts. Could a significant change in diet, in fact, make it worse, or could it alleviate the symptoms? We have to look at both sides of the equation and prove it right or prove it wrong either way. Do they have the willpower to follow a strict dietary protocol? This is a big one. When we look at the results, you'll see that a lot of these individuals are barely able to make it through the day, let alone change a diet and learn what they need to do. And if they do experience keto flu, we know from our research that these groups of individuals are easily overwhelmed. So doing that research and how it's introduced to them, and do they require the psychiatric care to help support them in the journey, are key things that we need to answer. And will keto treat the cause of their individual depression, or could it potentially introduce a food sensitivity that that person wasn't exposed to before? So while they clean up their diet, they may be introduced to a particular food that could trigger inflammation. Hence, that may actually offset the benefit of keto itself. There's some pretty big questions, I'm sure you agree. And this is one of the most important ones that we've had to consider in the last few days is, could it trigger suicidal tendencies? And I'll share some reports from some of our members and their experiences in a minute. So through this process, as you're probably already aware, it's critical that we understand what types of individuals should we recommend the keto diet to, and which individuals should we recommend that they avoid it for the meantime until they get us to a specific baseline of health. And this is what I came up with for Unstoppable, which is the identity gap for success. What I noticed through my own experience, when my energy increased, my mood, of course, improved, but then when it dipped, that's when I would slip down into depression, which is why we ask the question, could keto help to stabilize someone's energy and effectively their mood? And the way that this works is pretty simple. I want you to think about your mobile phone. Most likely at nighttime, you plug it in, charge it up. In the morning, it's good to go. You're playing games, watching videos, listening to music, sending emails, no problem at all. But as the day goes on, what happens if the battery starts to get to 10 to 5% power saving mode may be switched on, in which your screen will be dimmed, you won't be able to use the light, all the background tasks that allow you to play games or watch videos start slowing down, it's harder to use. And as humans, we're really no different to our mobile phone. The question is, what is our energy source? Not just from food as fuel, biochemical, but also psychological. So the way that I break it down is in the battery, if we look at the 4 identity types, starting with the far right battery, you'll see the catalyst is highlighted in red. And then we have synergist, guardian, and defender. If we look at a catalyst based on our survey is someone who is operating at 75 to 100% of their capacity. These are the peak performers. And in fact, they only represent 6.4% of the 50,000 surveyed. this is the objective. We want to become and remain a catalyst. In fact, keto is a great option for catalysts to maintain their energy because they're somewhat overachievers, but like everyone else, they're susceptible to burnout. So we need to make sure that that energy is stabilized. The catalysts also have phenomenal mental cognition. They can do deep and meaningful work. They're highly focused. A large percentage of them set and actually achieve their goals. Then on the left battery to that one is the synergists. Now, synergists are operating at 50 to 75% of their energy levels, and they represent 39.9%. So they sit just below catalysts. They're still having somewhat of a struggle with their energy level, potentially dipping in the afternoon. They may have mild gut health symptoms, mild depression, although it hasn't set in. A synergist is very much well on their way to become a catalyst, but if they overdo it, then they may drop down even further. Now, you'll notice that there's a dotted line right in the middle between each of the two batteries. This represents the 50% minimum threshold for good performance. So a synergist and a catalyst are active, conscious creators. They're not stuck in their fight or flight mode 90% of the time, which means that they can rationally and logically solve problems. They also have a good baseline for health. So when it comes to keto, a synergist is an ideal candidate for doing the keto protocol because they have the mental cognition to process what they need to do, and they're more likely to be able to stick to the protocol for a greater period of time and potentially get through the keto flu. One interesting thing that we've found, and we want to perform more surveys on our database, is that when catalysts and synergists do keto, they don't experience the keto flu, which is fascinating. And I do believe that, and this is only a theory, we're going to do far more research and surveying on this, is that there is a baseline for health and they don't have as many sugar or carb cravings. We also know that these two identity types are eating relatively healthy, they're working out, there aren't issues with obesity either, and they're not struggling with chronic inflammation. As we know, chronic inflammation is related to depression as well, which makes these two identity types prime candidates to experiment with keto and see if it's a good fit for them. Then on the left-hand side of the dotted line, we have what we call the unconscious creators. Now, typically by no fault of their own. We have the guardian and then the defender. So the guardian is working at 25 to 50% of their capacity. And as I'll show you on the next slide, these individuals are struggling with depression. There is a percentage struggling with suicidal thoughts. They're not eating healthy. The obesity rates are larger. They're also less likely to achieve their goals, and they struggle focusing for any length of time. Now, the guardians represent 47.3%, almost half of everyone surveyed. Now, next to them, we have the defenders. Now, the guardians and defenders, I would suggest, based on what I understand to this point, is that these could be two high-risk groups for doing keto because of what they're currently experiencing. Defenders, a 0 to 25% capacity, these are the ones that wake up in the day, can barely hop out of bed, their energy level is completely depleted, and they're utterly exhausted. They're either angry, reactive, or simply don't care anymore because they don't have the energy and they don't have the mental cognition to even focus. They may have also experienced a massive decrease in motivation and they're not sure what their overall purpose is in life. Now, defenders represent 6.4% of individuals. Now, we've created the free online survey online at areyouunstoppable.com that you can take to see which one you identify with. So at this point, synergists, catalysts, fantastic options for experimenting with keto. And this is why the defenders and guardians could be at risk. We know that 71% of those surveyed of the defenders eat unhealthily, 86% crash after food, 89% strong carb and sugar cravings, 83% suicidal thoughts within the past month. 91% make excuses, 91% severe to mild mood swings, 95% easily overwhelmed, 73% rely on caffeine just to get through the day. And if we look at this from a health perspective, first of all, we can make several assumptions, is that their sugar, highly processed foods, their diet could be a contributing factor to their depression if a psychological trauma is ruled out. Now, the other thing that we need to be aware of is if we're going to suggest it to this type of individual who is having mood swings, it's going to be incredibly hard for them to do the research, to follow the meal plan, do the preparation required, because 95% of them are easily overwhelmed. So if you look at this individual and what we've found from the defenders and guardians that we've surveyed and who are members in our group, these are the ones that struggle with keto flu to a larger extent, as well as guardians. And I'll share some reports in a minute. But we need to consider what is the psychological state that someone is in when they're actually beginning this diet, and do they require psychological assistance? Is there someone else in the home that can help monitor their behavior and potentially put a stop to it if they do see themselves spiraling out of control? Now, we also know from the strong carb and sugar cravings that these individuals are most likely consuming high levels of carbohydrates and sugars. So when they go through a detoxification process and hit the keto flu, it may be more severe to them. But the biggest question we need to start asking is, what psychological impact could it have on this particular individual? Then we have the guardians. So the guardians, like I mentioned, are operating at 25 to 50% of their capacity. So a greater portion of them are eating relatively healthy. Still a large portion crash after food, which comes back to what they're actually eating. Are they getting an insulin spike and then it's quickly crashing? And then once again, having some carbs and then crashing again. A lower percentage with suicidal thoughts, although they're there and they exist, because even though it's 30%, it's 30% of half of the 50,000 people surveyed. Now, 70% make excuses, 65% severe to mild mood swings, and 75% easily overwhelmed. And there's, of course, a reliance on caffeine. So the questions, when we actually look at these two types of individuals, you could potentially come to somewhat of a conclusion, or at least a theory, that based on their current dietary protocol, that they may exhibit severe keto flu or keto depression, whatever you want to call it, because of the insulin and the body rebooting and trying to adapt to fat, which can be a significant shift for a body that's already in distress. And that's a key point to make. These individuals are in distress, not just psychologically speaking, but biologically speaking. They're stuck in fight or flight. They're not in their logical, rational mind for a larger percentage of the time, which means in that state, it's very easy to default back to old dietary patterns that simply don't serve us. So what are some of the associated risks for the guardians and defenders? As I mentioned, the keto flu may amplify existing symptoms. The adaptation phase could be extremely difficult. Yes, we know that keto could absolutely provide benefit for them in terms of stabilized mood, stabilized energy, the various different brain benefits, as well as cleaning up the diet. The question is, can these individuals cross the chasm? Because they're currently walking on a tightrope. And that's one of the key questions to ask, because it will be extremely difficult for them to maintain without the right support. There is a higher percentage that are likely to quit. Now, in some of the survey results, we found that defenders, when they set a goal, about 90% of them fail to achieve that goal due to a myriad of different issues. So we're working with a bit of an uphill battle in terms of changing their diet. We also have anecdotal, let me be clear, these are anecdotal accounts suggesting people became suicidal at the start of keto from some of our members. This one is a defender, so of course she's in the bottom 6.4%. My physical and psychological health is delicate. I felt completely suicidal 1 week into a strict keto program. And the other one, I started a downward spiral for me. I felt awful. Now, I want to be super clear. I'm not dissing keto. All I'm saying is we need to be careful. That's all I'm saying. And at what point do we actually introduce someone to keto? And are there transitional steps that we can actually take to help get them there, knowing their psychological and biological state? There is one thing that we need to consider with keto is that if someone has pre-existing conditions, say, for example, someone has an overgrowth of the yeast candida built up in their system, a candida diet is very much similar to a keto diet because all carbs and sugars need to be cut out, and even less than the 20 grams of carbs and sugar need to be cut out to effectively kill off the candida. But what can occur is when candida begins to die off, the body starts to become toxic, and it can take some time for it to rid the system of, and it may have to be done in conjunction with antifungals to make that process a little bit easier. Now, we know that there's some links from candida to depression as well as extreme fatigue. So if you're to introduce the keto diet to someone who potentially has candida, they may not even be aware of it, those existing psychological symptoms could be significantly amplified with the best intention of them getting better, of course. So one transitional step, and we've seen this work incredibly well with our members, is to introduce them to intermittent fasting with the objective that they slowly reduce carb and sugar intake over a slower period of time. And they also slowly reduce their eating window over the course of a couple of weeks instead of just diving straight into an 18 6-hour fast. So we want to make sure that these people are gradually improving their health instead of suddenly shocking the system in which they're not psychologically prepared to deal with at the time. The other part of this aspect is to reduce the inflammatory foods within their diet, which of course keto is great for, but do it slowly through intermittent fasting. Increase anti-inflammatory foods. And make sure that these types of individuals also have some guidance from nutritionists, psychologists, and if someone is suicidal, to make sure that they're actually being monitored, someone's performing a check-in. Unfortunately, with suicide, sometimes it's too late until we know. So this is why certain members, if there are other people in the household, need to do a keto diet or a program or an intermittent fasting and make sure that it's being monitored, but they're also getting the right support from other people. Now, once this is sustained for a period of time, they start to feel better, and the effects of our members happen relatively quickly within the first few weeks. What we've found is that they're actually able to manage just closing their eating window over a period of time. But in doing so, we just recommend that because of the psychological state they're in, just begin by observing what you're eating on a daily basis. And through that observation, then begin to make these dietary changes, change out the household pantry over time. And the reason we suggest that is because they are in fight or flight, a sudden change might be the thing that tips them over the edge, which is the one thing that we want to prevent most of all. So what does the future hold? Well, I still hold hope. Don't doubt me on that. But where I specifically hold hope is in the research of BHB and ketone esters for depression. Because what I want to find out, and this is the million-dollar question, is could introducing a ketone ester to someone who's on a lower carbohydrate, not necessarily in keto, place them in ketosis without providing keto flu or any of the negative side effects as they're doing the detoxification. And this is where I think there's some hope. The one challenge we currently face with this is ketone ester is extraordinarily expensive. Speaking with Jeff Wu from HVMN, I believe the first bottle of ketone ester, it was about $20,000 a bottle. Correct me if I'm wrong. But my jaw dropped when he told me that. They managed to get the price down significantly, and I know they're working as hard and as fast as they can to get it down even further. Now, the issue with individuals facing depression and mental health issues is that we do find that some of them are in a lower income bracket, potentially because their mental health is preventing them from generating income, getting a pay rise, functioning to their full capacity. So this is where I would love to see a lot more research done. There has been one initial study, but it's very much inconclusive at this point, in which we need to see with the ketone ester, once again, just like with the keto diet, what types of depression it could potentially help. The second biggest concern with all of the studies is that there needs to be randomized placebo-controlled studies of a ketogenic diet in various mental health conditions. And right now, the numbers are so small. And one thing in the review of 17 different papers that they found is that people's ketones weren't actually being tested through a blood test. So they can't say 100% sure was that person in strict ketosis the time that they were actually reporting on their results. And I know many of you will know people who say that their friends are doing the keto diet to later find them eating carbohydrates and sugar. And it's become so popular that people think that once you cut out carbs, you're suddenly in ketosis, which we know isn't the truth. So studies need to be effectively done where these blood measurements are taken, and also over a duration of time, and looking at different types of depression to say, okay, this person that has psychological depression, maybe their keto flow wasn't as severe as someone with biological depression. And where do we need to place this treatment, and where does it currently fit? So there are a lot of different questions that we need to ultimately ask right now that are going to take some time. As of this point, I highly recommend it for synergists and catalysts to experiment with. But for defenders and guardians, I would err on the side of caution, because we know that there are potential suicidal thoughts there. And we know from some anecdotal insights into our own members that they may experience severe symptoms that could cause even more havoc when it comes to their psychological health. So I hope you've found this presentation as interesting as I did to actually research it. Please feel free to shoot me any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. If you want to take the survey yourself, you can visit areyouunstoppable.com. So I want to say, sorry we couldn't be there in person this year, but I think this is just as great personally. I hope to see you soon. Take care.